Welcome to the B2B Category Creators Podcast, hosted by Gil Alouche, founder and CEO of Metadata.io. This podcast is all about sharing the real and sometimes uncomfortable secrets of category creation in the B2B software space. On this week's episode, we have David Spitz, CMO at Egnyte, a leader in cloud content security and governance, and Armando Biondi, CEO and co-founder of Breadcrumbs.io, a revenue acceleration platform focused on lead scoring and routing.
Good. Well, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Gil Alouche, and this is the Category Creation Podcast, episode number, I think, 23, but I'm not sure. I have together with me David and Armando. David, maybe you can start us off. Quick introduction of yourself.
Sure. I'm a Chief Marketing Officer at Egnyte. Egnyte is a company that helps businesses secure, manage, govern their most valuable and exposed form of data, which is their content.
Very cool. Great to have you here. Thank you for coming. Armando, you're next. A quick introduction of yourself and your company.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm, an operator and an angel investor. I invest in about 200 companies at this point, and I am running my third company after selling both my previous two companies. The current one is called Breadcrumbs. It's a no-code scoring engine as a service, and so happy to talk more about that if interesting.
Awesome. Well, great to have you both. I know both of you, and I'm really excited to have you. As I mentioned to both Armando and David, usually our guests have alcohol and I get them to drink when they do sales pitches, which you didn't, which is great. You just said two sentences about the company and moved on, which I thank you for. But there's no alcohol. I'm only going to be drinking a little bit.
So you are going to be drinking when we don't behave. So that's going to be...
Yeah, exactly. That's going to be... I don't know how that's going to work, but that's what's going to happen.
That's not going to be great for you.
It's going to be fine. It's Friday. I'm in the East Coast, like you, so it's cool. Armando, I know you and remember you from Espresso from 500 Startups. You're like one of the stories. I remember reading about you and meeting you at the 500 events. That was a while ago, right? That was a long time ago. You and Masi.
Yeah. So Espresso was September 2013, and we started it, and then we sold it December 2016.
Pretty quick.
It was it was 3 years, a little more than that. And so it was early 2014 that we got to know each other a bit. So yeah, it was a few years ago.
Very cool. I remember a lot about Espresso. It was partially even, I would say, inspiration for me to start a company. And you invested in 200 companies since?
Yeah.
Damn it. And you haven't invested in Metadata. How dare you?
I actually think I have, but
you have.
I need to look at my portfolio because it's like too many. I cannot remember them anymore.
Maybe through an SPV. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I think that's awesome. But I didn't realize it's been so long. That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's really cool. And David, you and I spoke, I think maybe like 3 to 6 months ago. You told me about your experiences at WPP, if I'm not mistaken. We talked about the mutual connection we have and how they came about to meet you when you were at WPP and how they were all nervous. I don't know if you remember that conversation.
No, I must have been drinking back then because I don't remember our mutual connection, but I do remember talking about being the ad agency those days. And no, I was there for 8 years. I joined through this management rotation program that Sir Martin Sorrell had set up and run for a number of years, where you spend a year each in the different agencies, and you get to learn a lot about different marketing disciplines, travel the world, meet a lot of people. And then I spent the rest of the time doing kind of what Armando's doing, investing in a lot of companies off of WPP's balance sheet. So not 100, but probably about 20 or 30 different companies we invested in over that period. Had a couple of good exits, and got a bit of the startup itch through that experience.
Very cool. Well, our podcast is called The Category Creation, so we inevitably talk about category creation as one of the subjects, although not everyone agrees that categories should be created, or not all companies should create a category. So we can start off there. Armando, since you operated 3 companies, in also two of them in a very busy space, the MarTech space, which I'm
Yes,
intimately familiar
AdTech
with.
space, which is worse.
Artist, even worse. Oh God, no one even says that word. It's like a dangerous word to say, especially with investors.
I mean, like who works in AdTech knows that AdTech is hard, right? And also who invests in AdTech knows that AdTech is hard. And it's not because like there are a bunch of reasons for that. It's not to like diminish like the value of working in a space or another one, but AdTech is hard. It's
Absolutely, no, it is.
fast moving. You have the Google, the Facebook, the Amazon of the world investing a shit ton of money and engineering resources into making that space move forward even faster, and so you have to keep up with that. And so as a consequence, your IP devalues itself faster than any other space or industry. And so it has its own rules. You have to know the game to play the game.
Yet you still chose to start a few companies in that space.
Yes, I like a challenge. I get myself into trouble to see whether I can get myself out of it.
You hedge your bets with the investments. Tell when you think about AdTech and MarTech in general, and it being, everyone knows the Lumascape, kind of the infographic. When you think about MarTech and the crowded space, and then you think about the words category creation, what comes to mind?
Well, a couple of things from my side. So, there is this tension. There's been this narrative that has been going on for a while about the fact that there is too many companies and that the space is consolidating or should consolidate. The reality is that if you look at the Lumascape, it started, I think, about 10 years ago. And back then it had maybe 200, 300, 400 companies, and now it's like 8,000, right? And so the reality is that I would argue that there is an almost infinite appetite for best of breed solutions that solve specific problems for specific segments of customers. And so if you put the intersection of specific problem for a specific segment of customer and then best of breed solution, it's really like a three-dimensional Venn diagram. And you could pretty much feed like a lot of companies and a lot of type of customers and a lot of different problems and solutions in there. And so you see the reality is that there is consolidation happening, yes, but there is also expansion that continues to happen. And also problems tend to become more and more complex if you think about it, and also change over time. And so different problems, different solutions that evolve over time.
I love that opinion, especially because I agree with it. There are two schools of thought, I think, in MarTech. That one that says that there's going to be like a Marketo 2.0, a 3.0, another black box company that is just going to include all of the technologies in there. There's a consolidation school of thought, and then there's another school of thought that says that there are new companies. If you look at the last Y Combinator a month ago, there are like 43 new MarTech companies just in one batch. So I 100% agree that that's happening. And
Brackets was one of them, by the way. Now that you mention it.
Drink. David, what do you think about from thinking? You worked in MarTech, but you also worked in especially WPP for so long, being almost on the other side of that equation. Being in a big conglomerate or a big company like WPP that owns many companies by itself. How do you see that space and then the consolidation or non-consolidation?
Yeah, it's a good question about ad tech related to category creation. On the one hand, ad tech has a very bad reputation of coming up with acronym soup. Every 2 months there's a new acronym. Companies trying to differentiate themselves from the previous generation, at a very rapid pace. On the other hand, that's a pretty incredible attribute of ad tech companies and entrepreneurs, is that they're constantly reinventing themselves with a laser focus on serving a particular customer segment, which is these advertising buyers, agencies, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like when I think about category creation, you probably have all read the Clayton Christensen book about the Innovator's Dilemma, and that was based on the Theodore Levitt concept of marketing myopia. And he says that, the famous quote, people don't want a drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. And he says all these companies like, the railroad industry got in a lot of trouble because they defined themselves as a railroad company as opposed to being in the transportation business. So he says, like, be careful about how you define your category, and don't get too religious about the category. Just follow the customer and follow the need. And ad tech companies are actually like a great example of people who just keep innovating around the customer. The result can be kind of comical around the acronyms, but they're really good at that thing. So I do have some concerns, I guess, about the topic of category creation, but when it comes to ad tech, I think it's a very dynamic industry, and I really enjoyed working in that for a period of my career.
I love that. I think the outcome in ad tech and martech, the outcomes can be huge if you're successful differentiating. What are some of your concerns? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I guess I referenced this a little bit, but category creation, it feels a little bit like Elvis. You always think about these category kings, and Elvis is sort of the king of rock and roll, but it's a complicated story. Did he really create rock and roll? I don't know that much about the story, but there were a lot of influences who were these unsung heroes who came before them. He never even claimed to be the guy who created the category, but a lot of category creation is this very kind of machismo, heroic element of saying, like, there's these great men usually who go out there and define a category. And I think that's just kind of secondary. It's less important than following the customer need that's already out there and serving it incredibly well. So category creation, it is helpful, but it's not as important as some other parts of marketing.
So one thought here, I don't know if you, for the sake of the conversation, I've been thinking about this idea of category creation for a while. To me, it's not like the company creating the category, is the company stumbling on a category that's creating itself and ending up capturing kind of the zeitgeist of the moment, or being positioned well enough to become like the top of mind, category defining solution for that specific vertical and or that specific customer, right? And so, right. Yeah.
That's definitely, the goal is a worthy one. You want to be number one or number two at something. You want to be top of mind, right, whenever people think about a need. I mean, arguably you want to become the name for that need, like Google instead of search, or Uber instead of taking a taxi. But that's usually something that maybe happens after the fact, once you've really tapped into that market opportunity, that need in an incredible way. It's very hard when you go out and say, I'm going to go create a category and I'm going to get everyone else to follow. That works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't, but the more important area is tapping into this cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, most of the time it doesn't, because creating a category is really expensive. And like the examples that you've been
expensive
talking about,
and long.
The Google of the world, the Facebook of the world, the Amazon of the world, the Uber of the world, they are the winners of a brutal and extremely expensive battle that have been raging on for like 10, 15 years, right?
What do you think? You never hear about all the guys who went out there, tried to create a category and, didn't work. And there's probably, thousands and thousands of those. And all people talk about are the ones where after the fact it works. So history is written by the victors.
That's very true. What do you guys think about, I had Nick Mehta here, and I also had the CEO of Sendoso, and both of them actually went after it, meaning it was purposeful. Nick Mehta, I think, is a kind of widely accepted as a person that, together with Anthony Canada, I think, together created the customer success. And to your point, Armando, even
a question, I don't agree with that. Like you say, created customer success. So there was a trend around customer success being a new function within organizations and being a need, serving SaaS as a business model. And then, Nick Mehta was very good at, anticipating the trend and or capturing or like seeing that happening and positioning himself to be the solution of choice for that cohort of operators, which is differentiating from creating a category, right?
You're differentiating between the customer success people already existed maybe, but maybe they didn't have that job title, maybe they didn't have a piece of software or process or career path.
the soundbite to me there is that new spaces evolving into new categories because there is a new breed of operators popping up will need a tech stack. And so within that need of a tech stack, there will be one or two solutions, back to David's point, that will become the solution of choice, and so the category winners. But did they create the category, or like were they there when a new need emerged in the market, and so they were the right solution for that right operator at the right time?
Do you think there is a chicken and the egg sometimes situation where there might be a little bit of a need or something kind of popping up, but then an entrepreneur or whoever, a business operator, captures that and then makes it into something much bigger than it would? You know, I remember talking to Nick, and I remember asking about something completely different. We were talking about raising money and how it was tough for him to prove to VCs that this thing is even happening to begin with. This whole like customer success, not everyone was really convinced. And he said, "Hey, I would always go to basics, even after a bad conversation with a VC that wouldn't give me that check. I would go back. I would go to Google Trends and I would look into." What's that?
That's because people assume that VCs are smarter than them, and that
outside of that, I completely agree with that. But he said he would go in and look into Google Trends just to confirm to himself, okay, yes, this customer success job is growing, and there's a trend I can ride.
Customer success is growing, and if you think about why success is growing, because business, like from a business model perspective, like fundamentally SaaS requires, it's an ongoing subscription, right? And so when it's high value customers, you want that relationship to not only to continue, but to grow over time. And that is really tied to emergence of SaaS as a business model. And so again, new business models, new functions within organizations need new solutions and technology supporting their function. And then, yes, Nick Meta and Gainsight, great job. But did they create the category?
I love the distinction. You know, it's very interesting. I don't think that distinction came up. So I think what you talk about is that there was a natural movement that was happening. Maybe it was moving slowly, but it was happening anyway because of a business need, because of a reality. SaaS, recurring revenue, the NRR, all that stuff. There is a need for success.
I'll give you the Adespresso example, right? So with Adespresso, we didn't mention it, but like it was a good story. Adespresso was Facebook advertising optimization for small and medium businesses, small and medium enterprises. In about 3 years, we mentioned that ended up processing about $1 billion in Facebook advertising budget through the platform. So ended up being one of the top 5 globally by volume, and one of the top, probably the top #1 partner for Facebook by number of advertisers. And we did that because we were extremely good and focused on content. So we ended up doing like 750,000 monthly uniques visitors on our website. We would publish content that would rank on top of Facebook. If you search for Facebook updates right now on Google, the Adespresso page ranks higher than Facebook, which is not supposed to happen. Did we create that category, or did we capture something that was happening outside of us and we were the best positioned to be the winners because of a series of events?
Very interesting. So you saw the trend and you captured it, and you kind of rode that wave. I always think about marketing automation as another trend that kind of caught on. And you know, it's interesting distinction. I wonder how big of a role those companies that took advantage of, or maybe even defined it, because you know, if you talk to Anthony, and I even remember talking to Anthony before I talked to Nick like years ago. And his point was making the customer success career, or making them like a first-class citizen in the organization, something that they really worked on. So you may not give them the credit to create a category, but would you give them credit for defining it and making it a big deal?
Winning the category, absolutely yes. For creating the category, would the category have existed if not for them? Like if the category would have not existed without them, yes, but that would be diminishing to me in this customer success example. I don't believe that customer success would have not existed without Gainsight. It would have existed anyway. There would have been another, maybe, I don't know, solution instead of Gainsight that was competing, and then Gainsight ended up winning the space. I'm sure like he had competitors, right?
Yeah, that sounds like an example of picking an audience and, serving them incredibly well. So if you think of a market as a group of people and a job to be done, that's exactly what we're saying too. It's about tapping into a market that exists and, giving them voice and, capturing that wave, as opposed to, I don't know, you're familiar with like the value proposition, like the typical Jeffrey Moore value proposition. It's like for user group who need to do X, that makes sense. But then you'd say, my company is Y, and unlike competitors, we do, Z. I just think that middle part of the statement, my company is Y, is maybe the least important part of the sentence. It's not unimportant. Like, it's in there for a reason. You have to have a label that people can share and identify with. No one wants to buy something that no one else is buying. So it gives you sort of confidence that this is a real thing, and I'm not the only one who's taking this risk. But more important, I guess, in this Gainsight example is that, he identified an underrepresented community and, just was laser focused on them, and people weren't paying enough attention to that part of the organization. So that seems like a good, that's definitely very worthy and important.
Another element to me, and I 100% agree with what Dave just said, it's timing, right? So that if you accept the fact that new needs create new functions within organizations that require technology to do their job better, there is a timing window where the function is new, and so it needs that technology stack. And then the technology stack emerges, and within that emerging technology stack, you have one or two winners. If you arrive 5 years later, that's done. If you arrive 5 years too early, it's not there yet.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example that I was watching when Steve Jobs introduced the iPad, and that I remember that time because he announced it. I was working at WPP at the time. He announced it in January. My daughter was born in March, and it shipped in April. And so I ordered it, and I was like, all excited to be sharing photos of my new family on that iPad. But before it shipped, I remember taking, this was our first child, I took our laptop to the hospital because I thought we're going to be sitting around there for a long time. My wife's going to want to watch some movies. And it was very clunky. We kind of had the laptop propped up, in the delivery room, tried to watch movies. It was a horrible experience. And, 2 or 3 weeks later, the iPad emerged, and I was rewatching and my baby emerged 2 or 3 hours later. But I was watching his introductory remarks, and he was saying, do we need a new category that's between the phone and the desktop? But then he wasn't really talking about category creation. He wasn't coming up with a label like you would in ad tech of a new DSP or SSP or a phablet or this or that. He was just saying, like, if you want to browse the web, from your couch, if you want to share photos of your children on the go, if you want to watch a movie on the plane, like those needs existed. And, I felt those needs very strongly because I was crunched up there, trying to watch movies on a laptop. It was a very awkward experience. And he just picked the right time and the right need to be launching that device. And it wasn't really a big deal about whether, it was a category, not a category. All he cared about was like, we're going to address this need better than anyone else. He did take time away to knock the netbook in the opening speech, which I love too, and just say how it was just basically a slow, low quality PC. But he wasn't making a big deal of like, he used the word category, but not trying to come up with a new label. The label was already there as tablet PC, and he didn't have to make that up.
Like Apple is always the grand example of those things.
Let's
change. Yes, perfect timing and perfect products too. Let's change subject for a second. Let's talk about something completely different. Armando, you're starting your third company, right? I didn't even realize you had a company, by the way, in between Breadcrumbs and at Espresso. It must have not done that well. No,
it was before Espresso.
Before Espresso,
and it didn't go well. Lots of learnings, as they say, but not much else.
That's cool. What was the name of that company?
It was Pick One, and it was the idea back then. It was 2009, and the idea was social market research out of Facebook data, funny enough, for enterprise companies. And then clearly it was before Sheryl Sandberg, back in the days when like Facebook was this tiny up and upcoming young company that was coming out of, the US back in the days. And then they went in a completely different direction because, of course, they hired Sheryl Sandberg, which was hired with a specific mandate, if I remember correctly, of kind of replicating the Google infrastructure into Facebook. And so giving away data was not a topic. They wanted as much as possible to be able to keep that, competitive advertising infrastructure to go against Google.
So Sheryl tarnish your business model. What's when you think about, and I'll go to you, David, next. But Armando, maybe you can give us the first answer. When you think about the biggest, for those three companies three companies you created, seeing a lot of the usual stories, a lot of the usual romantic stories about startups, the ups and downs, the TechCrunch articles. What's the truth that you have that is absolute, that is contrarian to the common belief, something that you've experienced to be opposite of what you hear on the stage of SaaStr?
Well, there is one thing that people constantly say. Some people understand. I don't know how many people really internalize, which is the fact that things like overnight successes don't really exist. Like overnight success is like 7 years in the making most of the times, or something like that. And also personal struggle, maybe the single most difficult thing from my perspective in doing this, I've been doing this for 12 years now, something like that, is that some like things you cannot accelerate beyond a certain pace, right? The example that I give, and I had to relearn this over and over again, I still do. Like if you have like a little plant and you give it too much water, it will drown. If you give it too much sun, it will dry out, right? So you have to give the right amount of water and the right amount of sun and time, and it will grow into a beautiful tree, right? Like it will take like 15 years, right? And so it's that type of thing. And in parallel to that, of course, you're eager and ambitious and overachieving and working insane hours. And so you want all things to go as fast as possible and happen now. But there is also that other side.
Love that. Do you have a particular example that comes to mind when you think about that, like impatience for growth and accelerating it?
No, everything. I'm constantly frustrated because I see the future. Like my curse is that I see the future, how exciting it can be. I can totally see the path to get there, but you're not there yet. And so you're like instead like stuck here and making tiny little progress on a daily basis, which is super painful and hard to get. But yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. David, what about you? What's an absolute truth that you've learned? You've been on both sides, kind of both on the corporate and on the startup sides, that to be true, that is contrarian to the common view.
I guess I think startups are a great place for generalists, and people usually assume the opposite. Startups, all you need is engineers and killer salespeople, and that's kind of all you need. But actually, I think there's so much of the startup environment. I've been CMO at 2 growth stage companies or high growth companies. So much is just unpredictable, and you have to wear so many hats. I guess that's kind of obvious, but what was not obvious, a lot of people come to me and say, should I start with demand gen, or should I start with branding, or should I start with product marketing? And I've done it every which way, and always gotten it wrong, because what I've learned recently, I just started taking up boxing during COVID, and when you slip, it sets you up for the punch, right? So the offense and the defense are just totally interrelated. I understand skiing is kind of the same thing. Like your one turn kind of slows you down, but it also creates momentum for the next one. And so I guess it goes back a little bit to your growth analogy. Like you have to do things in lockstep, and you have to be really ready. It's really truly about juggling these balls. And if your muscle is too strong, in one area, you're just going to get knocked out. So, having that balanced approach. And when it comes to marketing, doing a little bit of product marketing, a little bit of demand gen, a little bit of brand, step by step as you ladder up is super important, because those things, are just, interchangeable, and they create a multiplier effect. But if you do one without the other, you're going to get crushed.
Many interesting follow-ups on that one. First one is, at what stage do you think a startup, or maybe not a startup anymore, needs a generalist, and at what stage do you start bringing in, particular professionals and experts to do a particular job?
We're really, at Egnyte, we're bringing in all the experts now. We've got about 700 people, coming on 800 people, and over 100 million in revenue. And now it's really about specialization. But even as early as, when I joined 2 years ago, we still needed people who were more flexible. I guess the ideal is always people who are T-shaped, who have that depth, but can also be flexible and adaptable.
And also,
it's not just startups. It's really the whole world now, and technology. Things are moving so fast that too much rigidity in your expertise. Like we have some people who are too expert even. They know, let's say, where Egnyte exists is we're kind of like to use another Steve Jobs, kind of like the iPhone, where they matched up this and this and this. We're matching up content management with security, with AI for content intelligence. And we have some people who just know one of those things too well. And if you're too rigid and you only know security, or you only know content management, and you're not flexible enough to create this new, combined offering, that's going to be a problem. So in any company that's moving fast, you have to be capable of sort of forgetting some of your trained assumptions. So anyway, I don't know. There's a good book on that too. I'll have to send you the name, but it talks about Tiger Woods, being the master of specialism, and Roger Federer being the example of the generalist. And Roger Federer kind of grew up playing lots of different sports, more soccer and more squash than he did tennis. And he became an incredible athlete because tennis is a more unpredictable sport. And, golf, it works okay to be a specialist, like maybe in music, because those sports they're so controlled, like almost everything's under your control. Yeah, there's wind and stuff, but there's no competitor throwing balls at you. And, in startups and, high growth environments, it's just a classic example of like, there's so much kind of uncertainty in the environment that journalism is good, I think, at all stages, as long as you have some specialists too.
Super insightful. Armando, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I was thinking that I would argue that it's a generalist to specialist ratio that changes over time. There is even more mature companies. I was thinking back to my experience at Hootsuite, which is a company with 1,000 people. And you have like generalists, and then you have specialists, right? And when you look at a startup as a super early stage, like a 10 people company, it's mostly generalists. And so as the company grows, you grow in size. So you hire more people, but you change also in terms of seniority. So you are progressively more senior people and less junior people. And when you get to, I would argue, maybe Series A, looking at Series B, you start building that, specialist arsenal, quote unquote, of people. And then over time, of course, as the company matures, it evolves as well. That's how I would frame it. I don't know if it's useful or not.
Now, maybe you don't want your director of engineering to be a generalist, or your director of security. You probably want that to be a specialist. Yes. But yes. I think that's something that's counterintuitive, though, about the startup environment, that it does lend itself well to people who have more kind of broad interests.
Hey, David, tell us about taking on boxing. How long you've been doing it for?
Well, it's just in my house, but it's been a nice way to break up the pandemic. And I tried it a little bit before. I think I told you I moved from Brooklyn about 18 months ago, just before the pandemic. And Brooklyn has all these great boxing gyms, including some very famous ones. And I never did it there. And I guess maybe it was a little bit of homesickness that got me to do it now that I moved out to the suburbs. But there's all these great, there's a Peloton competitor for boxing now. So I've observed ads by them every day on Facebook. I decided not to go that direction. Instead, just signed up for an online subscription service that is run by one of George Foreman's sons, and it's great. I mean, it has all the videos. It's about a quarter of the cost is the one that has the sensors built into the gloves, but I'm sure both of them are very good.
Very cool. So you do that at home, like shadow boxing, kind of like recording yourself and working.
I have a bag and some of the other equipment. It's very I got the Peloton too, but you can get a bag and all the equipment for $100, versus you can't get started with the Peloton. Yeah,
subsidized by VCs, I'm sure.
Well, they did invest in that Peloton competitor. I did see that on TechCrunch that they just raised some massive round.
Yeah, that's of course.
I was about to say your nose looks very nice and solid.
Right. No, I haven't gotten into the ring yet.
No, I didn't get into the ring yet. That's cool. I think that's very healthy. How long have you been doing it for?
Well, like I said, just a pandemic
a year and
break, so about a year. Yeah,
that's awesome. Good for you. That's exciting. Armando, is there anything interesting that you have taken on that people don't know that this is a habit of yours?
I started a new company. The breadcrumbs, I actually incorporated it the week before global lockdown started last year. And so that was my pandemic project.
Well, that's your comfort zone at this point. You're starting companies.
I know. Yeah. No, that was about it. Well, I'm actually moving to New York. So you might call that also as a little side project. So after 11 years in San Francisco, I'll be moving to New York in a few weeks, actually.
That's right. Last time I saw you was at the event at I forgot the name of that hotel in close to in San Francisco.
Okay.
Yeah. The VC Partech Ventures event. I think I saw you. I think I saw you there.
Might be. Cannot confirm nor deny.
That's okay. Yeah. You were a little drunk. No, that's great. I think.
Cannot confirm nor deny either.
That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. That was really nice. I think that was really interesting insight that both of you had. If you have to go back to, and you both had different careers, so I'm interested to hear that answer. If you have to go back to a failure that you had, a personal failure, like something that you screwed up, like you just failed at something, like a big, nice hashtag fail that you went to sleep like embarrassed and pissed. Armando, I'll start with you. What do you think? What's the first connotation that comes to mind when you think about that? When you think about hashtag fail and you look at yourself and like, shit.
In which way? Like what it is, or what's the second part of the question?
And tell me the story.
My first company didn't go great. Yeah, I mean,
that was because of Sheryl Sandberg, nothing to do with you.
Yeah, maybe, but yeah, still, I mean, it's your company. You throw like 2-3 years at it. You raised, $1 million or something like that for it, and so, and it's you. Startups are intense, and it's like on you most of the stuff, and it's one of the things that it's hard. It's to separate yourself from your company, which is something that I ended up learning through that experience. But most people have challenges doing that.
What, you were able to learn that? Tell me.
Yeah, I would argue that, yes.
How do you separate yourself from the startup?
Well, there is you, and then there's and then there's your company. But like a lot of founders identify and tend to personalize their startup because it is personal, right? You're putting your network into it. You're putting your background, your expertise, your insights into it, your work, blood, sweat, and tears, your time into it. Your family knows about it. Your friends knows about it. It's the only thing that you talk about for most of the times with most people. But it's still not you, right? And so at some point,
I didn't get to that lesson yet. Don't ask me. I think it's the same. But no, I'm just kidding. You're right. I think it's a very hard lesson, though. I think you may have, but you didn't answer the question. So I'm going to go to David, and then you think about I want a particular example of something that you personally screwed up, a mistake, an act of failure. David, you had some time to think about it by now.
Yeah. Well, probably my most public failure. I started off as a journalist when people actually read magazines, and I got this dream job at Time Magazine. And like, before the iPhone and everything, like people read that stuff, what maybe they read in the bathroom or the doctor's office, but everyone read it. And so my job as the new guy was to kind of write some of the stuff in the front of the book, the winners and losers, and maybe the obituaries. I wrote the table of contents sometimes, but it was a great job. And one day I misspelled Shaquille O'Neal, and I looked up his name, 20 different ways on LexisNexis and all these other newspapers and stuff.
P-H-A-K-I-L, right?
It's a hard name to spell. And I got called up into the editor's office, and he literally threw the book at me because he said, I don't care how much internet research you did and found to justify, the spelling of that name. Like this is a real book, like that tells you how the name is actually spelled. It teaches you not to trust what you read on the newspapers or on the internet. So that was probably like most visible because, back in the day, hundreds of millions of people would have read that. But my failure from that was actually leaving that job because it was a tough job, and I knew I didn't want to be a creator, like a writer for my whole career, but I should have stuck it out a little bit longer. I was there for less than a year. I don't know if that sent me over the edge. Maybe subliminally it did. I got an offer to kind of move on and start to get into the tech world, but I should have stuck that out. I should have stuck that out longer. And I remember when I quit, the editor was like, was it because of the Shaquille O'Neal thing? And I was like, no, it wasn't because of that. It was, I wanted to move on. But that was, I'd say, a failure in my career. When you get early in your life, if you get an opportunity, even if it's not forever, just like see it out for a little bit longer, because you can learn so much from that experience. And being a CMO, probably one of my top jobs is being the copywriter, and having those skills is pretty helpful. I wish I had a little bit more of it.
That's cool. I think everything is for the best, but that's cool. Did they ever print out those hundreds of millions of copies, or it
Oh yeah. Oh no, that was the issue. Is like, it's not like, these days where it goes on the BuzzFeed website and then they could just change the website. There's hundreds of millions of copies misspelled. And at the time, there was a lot of issues with young reporters being loose with the facts. So people were extra sensitive. Was I one of those? I'm just assuming the best of them. Was I one of those guys who was going to be loose with the facts? And there was a rash of that at the New Republic and other places. So it was, public failure number one.
That's a cool failure. That's a cool. Armando, what about you?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Like if failing at a company, it
doesn't have to be a company. What's first of all, I'll just write 1 more minute and then I'll leave you alone with that one. But like, what's the example, like just a personal experience where you fucked up personally, not someone else. You made a mistake and it had consequences that were just fail/embarrassing on you personally, an implication on you personally.
That's the biggest I can think of. I don't know. There's nothing else coming to mind.
See, this is why I need alcohol for my guests. Hey, I know I'm having a lot of time, a lot of fun. When I do have a lot of fun, I realize the time goes by and I forget to assess it. We have 5 minutes left for this episode. I want to ask you before we end this, if you have one piece of advice for entrepreneurs early in their career, like people who want to start companies, people who are maybe on that first few months of confusion, not really knowing if what they're doing is the right thing, should they do it, all that tough time. What's a piece of advice you have for them? David, you can. I see you're muted, but I'm going to start with you first. What's a piece of advice you have?
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because the piece of advice is not to give so much advice. It's something that I'm struggling with, every day. I think I have a little failure where I give too much advice, and just to try to inquire more, advocate less, because, especially as an entrepreneur or someone who's highly educated or just highly motivated, like, you want to control the situation, you want to win, you don't want to let your teammates make mistakes, but that's something you really have to do, is you have to let your teammates make mistakes. You have to not control the situation. You have to let other people flourish. So I don't know if this applies just to entrepreneurs, but it's something that I'm working with on in my own career, my own management style, is how do I give less advice and ask more questions?
Fair. Armando?
On my side, I would probably suggest / recommend like a trial and error type of approach. Like if you're testing something out, if you have this idea that you think might be great, try it out, low stakes, see where it goes, and then iterate on it, kind of like applying the scientific method, right? Trying to kill it yourself before someone else does, in its most important pieces, right? In its most important elements. Usually you want to, the more you can do that and the more it survives, the more you can have confidence that there is something there.
So be your own critic, your harshest critic, be your own devil's advocate before you.
Yeah, but actively try to kill your idea and see whether it survives. Like I've done that a bunch of times, and it works.
David, and
that's
Armando,
not too different. Yeah, that's not too different from
no.
my advice. Not to give advice, is kind of to recognize the limitations of your own opinions, and be open to the outsiders more. That's a struggle for entrepreneurs, but it's a struggle for everyone.
Yeah, and there's always that balance to do between conviction and being kind of a little crazy, but also being to coaching. I think that's kind of the balance. Gents, I really enjoyed talking to you. You were awesome. A lot of fun. Thank you very much for your time, for your participation. Have a wonderful, beautiful weekend.
Chat soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion and will tune in again. Find all of the B2B Category Creators episodes at Metadata.io. And if you have any feedback, topics, or would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out.